Welcome to Rescue Paws Stories, your go-to place for heartwarming and emotional humans and animals stories. In the heart of Alaska's unforgiving wilderness, where snow blanketed the earth in an endless sheet of white, and the wind howled like spirits mourning forgotten legends, a gray wolf named Senka paced anxiously beneath a grove of frost-bitten pine trees. Her breath came in quick, desperate puffs, visible in the freezing air. Her cub, a fragile bundle of life named Lero, had slipped into a narrow crevice in the frozen earth while they were navigating the forest in search of food. The opening had been covered by fresh snow, deceptive and deadly. One careless step, and the little one had vanished with a yelp. Senka had tried everything. She dug until her paws bled, howled so loudly that the forest birds scattered, and nudged her muzzle as deep into the crack as she could. But it was no use. The crevice was too tight, too deep, and the snow kept falling, threatening to cover the cub completely. Lero's faint cries were growing weaker. The mother wolf was wild with fear but helpless. Her instinct screamed at her to do something, but nature had not prepared her for this kind of rescue. Her maternal heart throbbed in agony with each passing second, as her cub's whimpers became little more than a whisper in the ice. Several miles away, a man named Elias, a reclusive woodworker in his 60s, was trekking through the forest with his loyal old dog, a deaf Labrador named Scout. Elias had lived in the outskirts of civilization for years, after his wife passed away, and their only child left for the city. He found comfort in the silence of the trees, in the rhythm of carving timber, and in the quiet companionship of Scout. But on this day, their journey was interrupted by something strange, an eerie, broken howl cutting through the cold air like a jagged knife. It wasn't just a wolf cry. It was desperation. Elias paused, listening harder, and for reasons he couldn't explain, his chest tightened. "Something's wrong," he murmured to Scout, who stood with ears perked, staring in the direction of the sound. Despite the warnings that wolves could be dangerous, Elias felt no fear. He felt pulled, compelled by something deeper than logic. As they drew closer to the source, they spotted Senka. Her fur was matted with snow and streaks of blood, her eyes wild and full of silent pleas. Instead of running or baring her teeth, she stood guard over the narrow crack in the ground, backing away slightly, but never leaving. That's when Elias heard it, the faint, desperate cry of a pup. He dropped to his knees, eyes scanning the snow-covered ground. He looked at Senka, then the crack, then back at the trembling mother wolf. "You're not attacking because you're not trying to protect yourself. You're begging for help." The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. With shaking hands and a mind racing against the clock, Elias leaned over the crevice. Using a small hatchet and his bare hands, he began chipping away at the snow and frozen dirt, carefully widening the narrow gap. Senka didn't move, but her whimpers grew louder. Scout stayed behind Elias, watching in loyal silence, understanding that this was not a time for fear, but for action. What Elias found next would shake him to his core. As Elias chipped away, the cold bit into his fingers, the sting barely registering beneath the pounding of his heart. The pup's cries grew faint but clearer, as if sensing salvation was near. The forest around them was eerily still. No rustling branches, no bird songs, only the crackling sound of Elias's labor, and the occasional soft whimper from within the frozen crevice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Elias pried a slab of ice free, revealing a tiny, shivering bundle curled up in the snow. Lero. The pup's coat was dusted with frost, and his eyes fluttered weakly, barely conscious but alive. Elias's hands trembled as he gently lifted the fragile cub into his arms, warming the pup against his chest. Senka approached slowly, her eyes never leaving Lero. She sniffed Elias's hands, and then the pup, letting out a low, grateful growl that was more a sigh of relief than a warning. The mother wolf pressed her cold nose against Elias's wrist, her breath steaming in the frigid air. It was a silent thank you, an ancient bond crossing the divide between human and wild. Elias looked down at Scout, whose eyes shone with pride and loyalty. Together they had bridged the gap between two worlds, the wilderness and civilization, the wild and the gentle. Knowing they couldn't leave the pup exposed to the harsh elements, Elias carefully wrapped Lero in his scarf, tucking him close. Senka, surprisingly calm, began to follow them as they made their slow trek back through the snow-laden forest. The journey back was arduous. Elias's legs ached, his breaths came heavy, but the weight in his arms, this tiny, trembling life, gave him strength. Senka stayed close, sometimes darting ahead to scout the path, other times glancing back to make sure her cub was safe. As twilight settled over the wilderness, the sky painted in shades of purple and deep blue, Elias spotted the warm glow of his cabin's windows through the dense trees. Relief surged through him. They had made it. Inside the small cabin, Elias set Lero down gently on a thick blanket beside the hearth, where the fire crackled and cast flickering shadows on the wooden walls. Senka sat by the door, alert but calm, as if sensing this temporary shelter was a safe haven. Elias wrapped the pup in a woolen cloth and fed him warm broth from a small bowl, watching as the little one's eyes slowly regained strength and brightness. Scout lay nearby, her body still and peaceful, her presence a steady reassurance. For hours, Elias and Senka exchanged glances, silent, unspoken understanding passing between them. The wolf, wild and fierce, and the man, scarred by solitude and loss, had formed an unlikely alliance forged by desperation and hope. In the days that followed, Elias cared for Lero with unwavering devotion, while Senka never strayed far, always watching, always protective. Together they faced the harsh Alaskan winter, bound by a fragile thread of trust. But the wilderness held many secrets and dangers still, and as Elias would soon learn, this rescue was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about survival, loyalty, and the true meaning of family. 3 days passed, and the storm outside raged like a living beast. Wind screamed through the pines, snow fell so thick it swallowed the horizon, and the wilderness beyond Elias's cabin became an indistinguishable wall of white. Inside, however, life stirred. Lero, once cold and nearly silent, now wobbled on unsteady legs across the cabin floor, sniffing curiously and occasionally letting out a high-pitched yip. He nuzzled Scout's thick fur and curled against her belly for warmth, while Elias watched with a quiet awe that stirred something long dormant in his chest. Senka never came inside, though she lingered near the windows, a silent, steadfast sentinel. At night, Elias left the door cracked open slightly, and when the fire's glow dimmed, he often saw her amber eyes watching from the tree line, her silhouette framed against the snow like a ghost of the forest. She did not come to take the pup back. Not yet. Somehow, she seemed to understand that her cub was safe and healing, and that Elias, broken in his own way, needed this small creature as much as the cub needed him. But peace is a delicate thing in the wild. On the 4th night, as Elias was whittling a wooden charm, a small wolf with eyes shaped like flames, Scout lifted her head and growled. Her deafness hadn't dulled her instincts. Elias stiffened. Through the window, Senka's posture had changed. She was rigid, tail low, hackles raised. Something was out there. Then came the sound, a crunch of snow beneath heavy boots. Elias stood slowly, heart thudding. He moved to the door, his hand reaching instinctively for the old hunting rifle mounted above the coat rack. Scout stood at his side, her body a wall of loyalty. Lero whimpered softly, sensing the shift in energy. When Elias opened the door, two men stood at the edge of the clearing. Strangers, hunters. One was young and cocky, chewing something between his teeth. The other, older, with a scar running down the side of his neck like a canyon. They both carried rifles slung across their backs. "Evening," the older one called out, his voice rough. "Didn't expect to find anyone this far off the grid." Elias stepped out, the snow crunching under his boots. "You're trespassing." "We're tracking a she-wolf," the younger one said, eyes flicking past Elias toward the trees. "Mean one. Killed a dog near the logging roads a week back. She hasn't harmed anyone," Elias said quickly, his pulse roaring in his ears. "She's protecting her cub." The older man narrowed his eyes. "And how would you know that?" "Because she's here, and so is the pup. I helped save him." A pause. Then a flicker of something cruel passed over the young man's face. "You're harboring a wild animal, old man. That's illegal." "No," Elias said firmly. "I'm protecting what matters. Now leave." But they didn't move. And behind them, the forest suddenly erupted with a low growl. Senka stepped into the open, her form sleek and strong despite the storm. She didn't attack. She simply stood between Elias and the men, her body rigid with warning. "Jesus," the younger hunter muttered, raising his rifle. "Don't," Elias barked, stepping in front of the barrel. "She's not a threat. She's a mother." The older hunter hesitated, his gaze shifting between Elias and the wolf. A long, tense silence hung in the cold air, broken only by the wind and the firelight flickering inside the cabin. Then, from within the cabin, Lero let out a soft howl. Small, uncertain, but pure. Senka answered with a low rumble in her throat, her eyes never leaving the men. The older hunter exhaled slowly. "Let's go," he muttered to the younger one. "This ain't our business anymore." "But now!" With a reluctant snarl, the younger man lowered his rifle, and the two faded into the trees, swallowed by snow and shadow. Elias stood outside a long moment, breath steaming, heart racing. Then he turned to Senka. She met his eyes, and something passed between them. Trust, gratitude, perhaps something older than language itself. That night, as Lero slept curled beside Scout and the fire warmed the cabin walls, Senka finally stepped through the door. Not fully, not all the way. Just enough to lay her muzzle on Elias's knee, her eyes closing for a brief moment of peace. It was the first time in years Elias felt the weight in his soul lift, if only slightly. But deep in the forest, something darker stirred. The hunters weren't the only ones watching. Something was coming. Something that would test every fragile thread that now bound man, dog, and wolf together. The snow fell heavier that morning, so thick it muffled even the sound of breathing. The world had turned quiet again, the kind of quiet that made Elias uneasy. Not peaceful, but anticipatory, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled softly, casting flickers of gold across Scout's aging face and Lero's restless sleep. Senka had not returned after the hunters left. She had vanished into the storm, as wolves often do, leaving without sound, without trace. But Elias felt her absence like a missing heartbeat. He stood at the window, sipping from a dented metal mug, watching the line of trees blur into whiteness. Lero whimpered in his sleep and began twitching, tiny paws kicking against the blanket. Elias crossed the room and knelt beside him, stroking the pup's silver-grey fur. "You miss her, don't you?" he whispered. "She'll come back. She has to." But something in his gut twisted. an old, familiar feeling he hadn't known in years. The last time he'd felt it was the day he lost his wife. An ache that told him something was wrong before it was spoken aloud. That afternoon, the storm broke. Elias took Lero and Scout outside for air. The snow was waist deep, and Elias had to carve a path just to reach the edge of the woods. The stillness remained, heavy and strange. No birds, no prints, no sign of Senka. Then he found it. A splash of red on the snow. Fresh blood, dragged in a broken line across the white crust toward the deeper trees. Elias froze. Scout's body stiffened beside him, and Lero let out a soft, confused whimper. Elias knelt, brushing away snow with a trembling hand. Wolf fur, grey, Senka's. His pulse surged with dread. The trail continued into the forest, winding like a silent cry for help. Without hesitation, Elias pulled his coat tighter, slung a small pack over his back, and lifted Lero into his arms. "We're going," he told Scout, his voice firm despite the quaver beneath it. "She's out there." For hours they pushed through the trees, following the blood trail and broken branches, the faint imprints of a struggle. And with each step, the silence deepened. Until finally they reached a clearing. The trees opened up to a wide, frozen river, and in its center, barely moving, was Senka. She was collapsed against a downed tree, one leg twisted unnaturally beneath her. Blood matted along her flank. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts. Elias ran to her, dropping to his knees beside her trembling form. Her eyes opened slowly, recognition flickering like a dying flame. She tried to lift her head, but failed. "She's been shot," Elias muttered, fury and sorrow clashing in his chest. "Those damn hunters must have circled back." Lero wriggled free from his arms and ran to his mother, pressing his little head into her neck. She gave a soft growl, not of pain, but comfort, and nudged him weakly. Elias opened his pack, pulled out what little he had, bandages, a flask of warm water, and strips of cloth. He worked quickly, pressing his scarf to her wound to slow the bleeding, murmuring gentle reassurances all the while. Scout stood guard, nose to the wind, tail stiff. She sensed something, too. Then came the sound, a snap of twigs behind them. Elias turned, and the younger hunter stepped from the trees, rifle slung over his shoulder. Alone this time. His breath fogged in the air, his eyes cold and unreadable. "You followed the trail," Elias said bitterly. "You did this." "She's dangerous," the man said flatly. "Wolves don't belong this close to people. You of all people should know that." "She never hurt anyone," Elias snapped. "She was protecting her cub." "She's wild," the hunter growled, stepping forward. "That's all that matters." Scout let out a deep, guttural bark, stepping between Elias and the man. But the hunter raised his rifle anyway. Then a sound shattered the moment, a gunshot, but not from the hunter's weapon, from deeper in the woods. The hunter spun, startled. Another shot rang out, this one closer. Then a voice, low, commanding and furious, echoed through the trees. "Drop the weapon, son." A figure stepped out, the older hunter, his rifle lowered, but his eyes blazing. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted. "You were supposed to follow the road back, not track the damn wolf again." "She's dangerous." "No," the older man barked, stepping forward. "She's a mother. That man's right, and you disobeyed my order." The younger man's mouth opened, but the words never came. He lowered the rifle, slowly, reluctantly. "Go home," the older hunter said. "Now, before you cross a line, you can't uncross." And just like that, the younger man turned and stalked away, swallowed again by snow and trees. The older hunter approached Elias, breathing hard. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I didn't know he'd do this. I owe you a debt. And so does she." Elias nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Together they fashioned a makeshift sled from branches and rope. With the older man's help, Elias lifted Senka carefully onto it. Lero curled beside her. Scout led the way as they hauled the injured wolf back through the snow toward warmth, toward safety. That night, under the glow of the cabin's firelight, Senka rested beside her son. Her breathing was slow but steady. Elias watched them both, heart heavy but hopeful. The older hunter sat in silence, staring into the flames. "I don't know why you care so much," he said quietly. "Most people would have let her die." Elias looked down at Lero, who slept curled into his mother's chest. "Because once, a long time ago, I lost my family, and I didn't save them. But this time, I could." And as the wind howled outside, Elias knew the story wasn't over. The forest had tested him, but something deeper was still coming. Something that would bind them all, man, dog, wolf, and wilderness, into one final act of redemption.